Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
A Time for Truth show is sponsored by the Office of Dr. Bermard Fialkoff, a periodontal, dental implant and laser specialist in New York City, for over 40 years. Dr. Fialkoff was honored by the International College of Dentists and Pierre Fauchard, and received the Presidential Lifetime Humanitarian Honor from the White House. Call us at 718-229-3838.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
Welcome to A Time for Truth show. I'm your host, Dr. Bermard Fialkoff, a 43-year periodontal and dental implant laser surgeon in New York City, having trained at the Memphis Veterans Administration Hospital. And it's my pleasure tonight to cover something that sometimes is very distressing, very confusing, and very emotion-provoking. Diseases, infirmities, healthcare costs. How much is that going to cost? What do I have to do? I need what? And we look at our world and we seem baffled, we seem dismayed, we feel hopeless. Is there a solution? Is there really a remedy to any of the social and community ills that we're suffering from? So these are topics that are really throughout the society. They're widespread, and they cause tremendous stress, tremendous upsets, turmoil, division, and we want a solution. So tonight we have something that's actually a breakthrough, something that was announced in recent months. And maybe you're really not aware of it, or you thought it was just something that you had a philosophy about. But what we're going to talk about tonight regarding stress, regarding disease, are not philosophies. These are scientific truths. And so they carry the weight of experiment and a real basis to what we're going to be presenting on this show for you. So let's first take a look at our first slide regarding stress and put something up on the screen for you that maybe you realize or maybe you didn't realize. But let's start at the beginning. Anxiety, worry, problems. We get scared, we get fear. Sometimes you say, oh my God, I have a pounding headache. I have tension. Oh, my neck is killing me. I feel so stressed out, emotional. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm so desperate. How can I manage this? And what do we call this? We call this stress. But stress makes it seem vague. Stress makes it seem like, well, we need a vacation. But when we get back from the vacation, we're back to the same rat race. We're same situations. So what have we really changed, and what have we done to manage anything? So let's go to the next slide, engineer, and we'll get some information, some data, some science from the Mayo Clinic about stress and the effects on your body and your behavior. Not a philosophy, but a truth, a scientific truth, which is how this universe runs, how life seems to run. Well, stress, that's not something that you deal with, that you let go, or that you can't do anything about, according to the Mayo Clinic, causes many health problems, such as high blood pressure, heart disease, God forbid, a stroke. I recently had a patient in the office that had a stroke, walking with his cane. It's not something you want to go through. Leads to obesity. Bothers you. Your clothes don't fit anymore. You're uncomfortable. You don't feel comfortable in social situations. You're not as confident as you used to be. And it seems like the ever-present disease, diabetes, that so many of my Latin communities suffer from. We love our black beans and rice, our fried bananas, but we get diabetes. And now we see that not only is it the food, but there's something associated, the stress. Let's go on to the next slide. And so, again for the Mayo Clinic, and another finding, that stress that's ongoing, that doesn't dissipate, that's called chronic, causes you to have a change in something you should remember that's very important, which is your cortisol hormone level. Cortisol increases with stress. And also other stress hormones that can disrupt your normal balance, your normal body function, normal processes. And because these normal processes don't work, it's like a car that's not firing correctly on all cylinders. Maybe one of them starts getting out of line and affects the whole engine. The engine being your body. And you run in and you have to see the mechanic. Is that a bypass? Is that a stent? Is that having to have some kind of endoscopy to find out why it is that you have so much gas, so much bloating? Stress. Let's go on to the next slide. And we talk about stress, and now we want to give something that came out, as I told you, in recent months, from the highest physician in our country, the Surgeon General of the United States of America, who published an advisory about a half a year ago or so on our epidemic in the United States of loneliness and isolation. A message from our Surgeon General McMurthy. Let's go on to the next slide. And the Surgeon General warned us. He sounded an alarm about this epidemic of our isolation, one from the other, in the United States. And the mere fact of having this beautiful cell phone doesn't mean that you're connected, as you will see as we go on to what the Surgeon General states. Let's go on to the next slide. So, Dr. Murthy made a call to action on this public health crisis. And he laid out a national strategy. And for what? This may blow your mind, or maybe it'll actually confirm what you've always thought. A national strategy to advance social connection, our connections, our conversations, our dealings with each other. The Surgeon General released his advisory calling attention to this loneliness and isolation and the lack of connection in our country. Yes, we have advances technologically, solar panels, high-speed internet. We're going into outer space. We're getting digitalized. We can do things never thought of before. But even before COVID-19, approximately 50% of the U.S. population was experiencing loneliness. Let's go on to the next slide. And what are the consequences of this loneliness? Because as a physician, my patients come in and they say to me, Dr. Fialkoff, what can I do? I'm losing all my teeth. I have diabetes. I have high blood pressure. What am I supposed to do? As a doctor, as a surgeon, we studied something at the VA hospital called general adaptation syndrome, which is another fancy word for stress. And we found that people that had general adaptation syndrome didn't heal as well, had more pain after the surgeries, had more problems with the procedures and staying numb. And I always felt there was something more than physical. Well, now we know from the Surgeon General statement that insufficient social connection or poor social connection, meaning maybe you have someone that's a negative influence. Not all social connection is good if you're connected to someone who is toxic to you, who has negative energy toward you. That's a poor social connection. So either poor or insufficient connection causes a 29% increase heart disease rate, causes a 32% increase risk of stroke, causes 50% increased risk of developing dementia. And all these older people, maybe who have Alzheimer's and all these things, I've always felt if they're isolated, if they have no purpose in life and no connection to anyone, isn't that going to affect them? And now we see the answer being scientifically, yes, it does. It's not just something nice to feel. It's just not respect and honor for your grandparents, your great-grandparents. It's an actual truth that our social connection will improve their ability to reason, to think, to remember. And something else very important, that the lack of social connection increases the risk of our death prematurely, and get this figure, more than 60%. I'm from the baby boomer generation, and I paused because I know my baby boomer colleagues want to live a long life. We exercise, we do all kinds of treatments, we research, we look, and we want to live, but live also in a positive manner. Not in a wheelchair, not with a stroller, not with a walker. And now we see that we're going to need to have, and not without social connection, and not with bad social connection, because we don't want to die 60% earlier because of a lack of connection or a poor connection with someone toxic to us. Next slide. What are the consequences in our country, aside from the physical and healing well from my implant procedures, my gum surgery procedures, soft tissue grafting procedures, bone grafting procedures, to have less pain post-operatively? We want to have that social and human interaction in person. It seems like that energy actually does something. And when we don't have it, the other consequences that I was alluding to is that 1 in 5 adults in our country, and more than 1 in 3 adults who are younger, are living with mental dysfunction in our country. 1 in 5 adults, 1 in 3 young adults living with some form of mental illness because of loneliness and isolation from others. And if you think about video games, if you think about cell phones, if you think about maybe just coming home and being exhausted and stressed out and going to sleep and not communicating with anyone, or getting home and you're so tired and so is your spouse that the interaction is a fight. It's not something positive. And so then what have we really done? Because now we have a negative social connection. Engineer, if you get that video ready, I'll call for it in a moment to give you some examples of this negative emotions that can affect you. And so it's critical that we address this social connection to also address this mental health crisis in our country. Let's go on to the next slide. And when you have that video, let me know, engineer. Okay, so let's go through this slide before the video. So, in addition to physical health, this loneliness, this lack of human contact, of interaction, leads to so much of this mental stress or these mental health issues that we seem to be suffering in our country. We wonder, why is it increasing so much? In adults, for instance, the risk of developing depression amongst the people who feel this loneliness is more than double, 2 times, more than double that of people who have good family, good friends, good marriage, good relationships. The loneliness of being alone, of not having that, causes these consequences. And the loneliness and isolation as young children also increase the depression and anxiety, and it extends now into the future because now we predispose this person at a very young age to these problems. So if we look at our youth playing video games, not hanging out with others as we used to do in my neighborhood, we'd go out and play touch football, we'd interact till dusk, our parents would yell and get us back in, but it was all interaction, and it was all human, and it was basically positive, and in a game, and with excitement, and a different era than we have nowadays. So let's take a look at some of these negative emotions that the Surgeon General has been talking about in this video that we'll show you for about a minute's time. Let's go ahead with the video.
Do you know someone who has never fully recovered from a serious loss in life? Or a traumatic experience? And in your own day-to-day life, do you sometimes experience self-doubts, negative thoughts, unreasonable fears, upsets, or irrational behavior? The painful experiences of our past clearly have an effect upon our present behavior. But to what degree and why? What causes the mind to depart from rational thought or behavior?
And years ago we would say, well, there's a separation here. The mental side, we could say the spiritual side, that's separate from the medical side, the health side, and the physical side. I never really thought it made much sense because as a health practitioner, I saw the opposite, as did many of my colleagues when they tried to help patients who were stressed. They just didn't seem to do as well. The person who came in and was being bullied by their partner, whether it was a spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, the sex didn't matter. It was a relationship. So let's take a look, Buddha, and go to the next slide. And, we'll take a look that this lack of social connection, according against the Surgeon General, not a philosophy, goes into the community. So not only does it cause individual heart disease, stroke, dementia, depression, but, very interesting, the Surgeon General noted that in communities where the residents are more connected with one another, they do better in terms of population health, in terms of community safety. When we look at violence, we're trying to find solutions for the violence in our communities. And probably we've thought there seems to be an individuation of people not looking at each other. Like we see in a lot of the movies from Hollywood, people going down the streets almost like hypnotized in a daze, not paying attention to each other. Someone on the ground, maybe fall and being attacked, nobody paying attention. But now we're starting to see that these are not just philosophical or religious aspects of life, but actually stress-causing aspects of existence, which cause health problems and community problems. So we also have the resilience of a community. We talk about the immune system and how the immune system is affected by stress. But now we need to realize that that community immune system, the community resilience of each of our individuals within the community and their interaction actually causes an ability or disability depending on whether it's positive relationships or negative. So if we have a lot of conflict, we have a lot of prejudice, bigotry, strife, violence, we're going to have a lot of negative energy in that community, and we'll be feeling the effects of the statement of the Surgeon General. Whereas if we get along, if we try to understand each other, where if we actually communicate with each other, then now we have the positive aspects of the positive energy that can affect us. I'm sure you've all gone into a room and not been comfortable in that room, and you probably felt that something negative had transpired before you got into the room. I don't think this is unique. We just never really looked at, did that have an effect on us? And where did that come from? How did we sense it? What sense was that? It wasn't sound, it wasn't sight, it wasn't hearing, it wasn't feeling, but it was some perception. Now it seems like the Surgeon General has found that that stress perception, or that lack of stress perception, which then would be love, harmony, accordance between people, concordance, leads to positivity. And so we have this not only individually, physically, and mentally, and spiritually, but also, as the Surgeon General pointed out, on a community sphere. And so then it leads us to looking at that and saying, well, does it make a difference if we have more trees in our neighborhoods? Let's go to the next slide. Does it make more difference in terms of our loneliness and isolation? Go to the next slide. Does it make difference what we experience? As a doctor, I took the Hippocratic Oath, and I swore to follow the system which, according to my ability and judgment, I consider for the benefit of my patients, my community, and abstain from whatever was deleterious to them. And that I would abstain from giving deadly medicine to anyone, even if I was asked to. But what would that deadly medicine be in terms of human relationship? Does it have to be a physical medicine? And is the physical medicine actually a negative and a band-aid for the lack of social accord, for the lack of family structure, for the lack of love, for the hatred that person feels even for themselves? And is that the reason why in 2023, 112,000 illicit drug deaths occurred in our country, double the total of the entire 10-year Vietnam War in 1 year in America in 2023 from drugs, from the mental crisis that we're facing. Let's go to the next slide, engineer. And while we have this epidemic, we say, well, what can we do about it? And the Surgeon General points this out. And this is quoting his advisory. He says, there is a medicine hiding in plain sight. And Dr. Murthy says, social connection, human interaction, positive relationships, community in accord, not community in violence, in uproar, in riots, in looting, in crime. That would be negative, leading really to affect all the members of that community, whatever race, creed, culture they were from. All members of that community would suffer from this malady of the negative energy. And so the Surgeon General's advisory calls for an awakening. It needs to a wake-up call in America. We need to stop fighting with each other because we're killing each other. We need to start communicating and understanding each other, as the Surgeon General has said. Let's go on to the next slide. We need to strengthen our social infrastructure. And what does that mean? Well, maybe instead of building walls, we should plant more trees as barriers. I think everyone should make a good living. But maybe the man who does construction and decided to build walls could switch and retool his company and still make a good living, but plant oak trees, spruce trees, fruit trees, pecan trees, which grow tremendous heights, which give fruit, which people can enjoy, which can bring shade and oxygen, and can bring more life to the area rather than more lack of connection. Let's take a look at the fact that if we just look at the material, if we keep killing each other, as my friend Bomba said, over paper and metal, killing ourselves over paper and metal, paper dollars, metal coins, metal gold, where are we headed? The Surgeon General's advisory shows it very clearly. We need to strengthen our social infrastructure. Buddha, the next slide. We need to wake up. We need to realize our relationships are essential to our health and well-being. The statement of the U.S. Surgeon General. This is why in my office I have a harmonious environment. Sometimes we run behind. Why? Because you can't run like a train station when you treat human beings. Sometimes some human beings require more time. And we need to understand that and give that to one another. And not beep horns on the LIE and drive someone into the shoulder, not letting them in off the entrance ramp. Look at the Surgeon General's advisory. Read it for yourself. When you come to our office, we'll be glad to help you to have health. It's what we practice in our office. We've done this for many years. And I thought you'd find this very interesting, that now scientifically, from the top surgeon in the country, this statement is being made to you. A gift on love, harmony, family, and friendship. This was part one, and in part two, I'll go over some treatment modalities, some nutritional concepts. We'll see you in part two. Thank you.
This show was sponsored by Atimefortruthfoundation Incorporated as a community service.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your feet